Supah Ritz, Volume 2, Chapter 4, Sundance, a.k.a. Fear and Loathing in Park City, Utah. The Sundance Film Festival is an annual conflagration of filmmakers and hustlers that takes place every January in the small ski town of Park City, Utah. Robert Redford founded the festival some 30 years ago as an addendum to his Sundance Institute, the creative think tank he dreamed up on the idea that independent film is a vital art form that needs mentorship, fellowship, and support. The festival, which has become way more famous than the Institute itself, began as a way of showcasing the work of the Institute's very first class of aspiring auteurs. What started as a sleepy showcase at the cinema closest to Redford's Utah resort has now grown into a crazy juggernaut of corporate sponsorships, exclusive parties, and rampant douchebaggery. Gifting suites, celebrities, and nightclubs now draw the crowds to Park City as much as any love for film. But when I first graduated from Mike Medavoy's desk in 1995 and was sent to Sundance as an emissary for Phoenix Pictures soon after, Sundance was still holy ground for independent film. It had only been a few years since Soderbergh's Sex, Lies, and Videotape had sold to Miramax for $1 million, and execs and producers descended on Park City every year in a rabid hunt for the next generation-shaping cinematic voice. People planned their trips for months, scouting directors, poring over the film catalog, pre-screening hot titles, and working the schedule of premieres, parties, and events. But when Mike told me I was heading off to the festival, I did none of that. I didn't even check the weather or buy a pair of boots. I hurled the old wool topcoat I'd gotten in boarding school into a duffel bag, slipped on my trusty New Balance running shoes, and headed off to Utah with only the vaguest sense of what was about to go down. The truth is that to me back then, Sundance was just barely an abstraction. Really just a word, Sundance. Maybe a weird clothing catalog I'd seen at my parents' house, full of spirit catchers and Navajo blazers. I didn't have the foggiest idea of what a film festival actually entailed, or why anyone would go to one. I'm not sure there's anything anyone could have told me that would have prepared me for the unique chaos of Park City during Sundance, but I was eager to wrap my head around it a little bit before leaving from LA. I put a call into John Brody at Variety to see if he could shed some light on the situation. John and I had gone to the same boarding school and been introduced for an informational drink a year before. We then spoke regularly during my tenure at William Morris, as his beat for Variety included the major agencies, and we would always pass a few droll words when he called into WMA to ferret out the latest goss from my boss, Rick Hess. In some ways, John was the closest thing I ever had to a mentor in Hollywood, someone who understood the business better than me, who I felt was solidly in my corner. I always felt John was someone I could call who could be honest with me, and who also saw whatever it was in me that might make me valuable and effective in Tinseltown. John later hired me to write a parenting column for Masonette that remains one of the all-time highlights of my career. You can check it out here if you're curious. The thing I wanted to know from John was something I couldn't even really articulate. Why go to a film festival at all? What's the point? Who cares? Like, what even is it? I was too embarrassed to admit I didn't know the answers to these fundamental questions that surely any real film professional already knew. So I just peppered John with vagaries that led to a kind of general impression about Sundance that I accepted as gospel for years to come. Sundance was a kind of Hollywood boondoggle. It was where all the cool kids went, and I should just be thankful that Mike or any of my future bosses were willing to cough up the money to send me there as well. The truth, as I would come to find out, is actually way more simple, but it would take me decades to figure it out. Sometimes it seemed the only reason to go was to acquire films. That made sense. You were an acquisitions exec, and you needed to be there to buy titles. Sometimes it seemed the only reason to go was you had a film in the fest, and that's certainly true. Having a movie screen at Sundance is a thrill even when nothing really comes of it. Sometimes it seemed you went to nourish your ego, to be seen at the right parties with the right people, to let the town know you're still here. Sometimes the assignment was to find new talent, new directors, and new writers to bring into the fold. But the real answer as I see it now is so fundamentally basic, it's almost preposterous. You go because you love film. If that love is your guiding principle, Sundance never disappoints. But I believed in 1996 that it was what the cool kids did. So okay, I thought, I want to hang with the cool kids. Let's go. By my recollection, I barely even selected any films. Back then, you could reserve a ticket package sometime in the fall. Fat cats and stalwarts like Harvey Weinstein and Ruth Vitale would get themselves an express pass that cost several $1,000s and allowed them to walk into any film or event whenever they chose. This is what Medavoy got, even though he probably only went to like 2 films. Lesser professionals like myself generally purchased a Ticket A package or a Ticket B package for several $100, still a lot of money, which gave you the ability to see 20 pre-selected films that you could watch in either the first or the second half of the festival. Here's the hitch. You had to pre-select the films. Back then, you were sent the catalog of films as soon as they were announced and given a selection slot based on the order in which you had purchased the pass. If you bought the pass right when they went on sale in early September, you got a killer slot and you could have your pick of films. If you bought your pass later in the fall, you'd be given a lesser slot and find a lot of films were already sold out and you were scraping the barrel. Once you had your assigned slot, you'd call into the ticket office during your designated window with your list of screenings carefully laid out in the worksheet Sundance provided. Of course, it wasn't always easy to get through to the ticket office, and once you did get through, you'd find yourself in a total frenzy as your whole plan immediately blew up when every movie you wanted to see was already sold out. What's more, your selection slot was usually scheduled for some window over the holiday break, and I remember in later years pulling to the side of the highway in New England or scrambling out of a family dinner to desperately place frantic calls to the ticket office to try to secure my screenings. But for my first festival, I did none of that. Mike gave me the number of someone named Nicole Guillemet, the managing director of the fest, and told me to give her a call and let her know that Mike had asked her to set me up. Mike was in fact a founding board member of Sundance and carried some real weight with the festival back then. I don't think I even had a list of films in mind or on hand. I just asked Nicole to pick a couple screenings for me. This, for those in the know, would be like calling up John Cooper in later years and asking him to personally pick out a bundle of movies your assistant might enjoy. I had no idea what a luxury I was being offered. So little, in fact, that I was like, yeah, just give me 10 or so screenings and I'll take the rest as coupons to use once I figure things out. Knowing what I know now, these coupons are practically worthless because screenings are so hard to get into. This was just crazy talk. I landed in Salt Lake and took a rideshare van to Park City. This is still the way most people get back and forth to the fest. It's almost quaint in the age of Uber. You can take an Uber helicopter as well. But like all things Sundance, the van is an opportunity to meet people. You never know who you might be wedged up against in the seat bench beside you, your buttocks pressing awkwardly against each other. My first stop in Park City was the Sundance Film Office. Back then, it was located in the parking garage under the city lift, where Tao would later take up residence, hosting endless horrific late-night episodes like Jared Leto's infamous choking incident. It was an ersatz office space constructed of folding tables and blacked-out curtains, and I stumbled in there asking anyone if they could point me in the direction of Nicole Guillemet. I don't think it even occurred to me to simply try to get in line and wait patiently to procure my pass. The rabbit's hole of computer wire and metal crowd control barriers that marked the Sundance ticket office was beyond my capacity to navigate. Nicole actually came out to meet me, crazy, and walked me through the process of procuring my ticket package and badge. I then huffed my way up the big hill on Main Street, happily surprised by the cozy charm of this classic ski town, to meet up with Christy Prunier at a place called Café Tarigo, still one of the more civilized places in all of Park City, for a quick debrief before she headed back to LA. Christy had had a pretty successful Sundance up until that point. Shine, the film starring Jeffrey Rush as damaged piano protege David Helfcott, had just taken the fest by storm, selling to Fine Line in a legendary and controversial bidding war with Miramax. Scott Hicks, the director, was the toast of Sundance, and somehow Christy had managed to get Hicks, heavily pursued by every producer and studio in town, to show up to Mike's cocktail party at the Stein Erickson Lodge, way out in Deer Valley. This was a major get and a feather in her cap. It was also part of the job I would always despise, cajoling people to show up for parties and events, my own personal wattage constantly being tested and scored. But networking has always been key to Hollywood success. Even a brief press of the flesh might open a door that could lead somewhere. Still, I always found my self-worth fluctuating violently over who I had been able to rope in and who had skirted my net. What did I have to offer anyone that might make for a compelling case to come hang? Nothing that I could see, and I hated the pressure to deliver on something over which I had so little influence or control. I was impressed that Christy had somehow managed to come through. I couldn't imagine how much wheedling it must have required to make that come to pass. She was having a coffee with another development executive whose name I can't remember, and Christy introduced us. Somehow these intros always made me feel like Christy's younger, booger-eating brother who vaguely stunk of pee. I don't blame Christy for this. It's clearly a reflection of my own problematic self-esteem. But Hollywood development ranks always felt so hierarchical to me. Presidents trying to keep their VPs in place, while VPs tried to keep their D-girls in place. If a more senior exec was caught having a coffee with me out in the wild, I could always feel them scrambling to explain it away as some kind of mercy fuck. Don't get me wrong, I'll take a mercy fuck. It just hurts when you see it in their eyes. I got myself a coffee, the other exec left, and Christy walked me through a primer of what was expected of me while I was at Sundance. I would go to a lot of movies. Screenings generally started at 8:30 a.m., and the last screening, the midnight screening, usually got out around 2. In between, there were parties and panel discussions, and I was expected to use my time at Sundance to attend these events and network as well. If I saw a screening I liked, Christy told me, I should introduce myself to the filmmaker, give them my card, try to get their information, and try to set up a follow-up meeting for them back in Los Angeles with her and Mike. Okay, I nodded gamely. I can do that. In truth, this was the first moment I finally understood what I was doing in Park City. I was here to watch movies. I know this seems obvious, but up until this moment, no one had simply said these words. Sure, people talked about the films, but they also talked about so much other stuff that I couldn't wrap my head around the idea that I was getting sent on a trip, spending all this money to do something so simple, something you could do anywhere. But okay, I can watch movies. Christy and I marched off our separate ways, she to get ready to go back to LA, and me to head off to try to find my first film. I say find because when you first come to Sundance, finding your screenings is like playing a game of Legend of Zelda. It's a quest, and the clues are archaic and obscure. The screenings are, for the most part, not held in traditional venues. Back then, they've changed a bit since. There was the library, an auditorium in the elementary school, the Yarrow 1 and 2, a couple of conference rooms in a beat-down local hotel, the Prospector, an auditorium in a decrepit athletic club, and a handful of more traditional venues. Once you've been to Sundance, this all feels like old hat, but when you arrive for the first time, it's overwhelming and strange. What's more, it's not like the screening venues are close to each other. Each theater, in fact, is miles from the next. To get to any of them, you generally have to take some form of public transportation. There's almost no parking in Park City. The festival provides a very reliable shuttle system, which over time became one of my favorite parts of the fest. You run into people there and share conversations with strangers about film, the ones they've seen and enjoyed, and the ones they've hated too. But you sometimes still lose patience waiting for the shuttle. It's winter, the roads can be tough, it's not always on time. And then you may hop on the Park City bus system that has buses that stop at nearly all the same spots. It may seem convenient, but beware. Those same buses also sometimes shoot off to distant ski resorts that have nothing to do with the fest. God forbid you get on the wrong bus, which you inevitably do, and find yourself zooming all the way out to Deer Valley, or worse, canyons, stopping at every random ski lift along the way, all but guaranteeing you don't get to your stop until long after your screening has already begun. I wish I could remember the first movie I saw at Sundance. The festival became such an integral part of my career. I made friends there. I had misadventures there. Eventually, I screened my own films there. It would be so sweet to be able to remember where it all began, but I can't. Still, I followed my directive like a good foot soldier and attended screenings from early morning to late at night. I watched movies about drug dealers and serial killers, sex addicts and suicides, the disaffected and alone, alienated young men and women searching for meaning and connection through lives of loneliness and despair. It was hard not to feel this way myself, another lone silhouette against a colorless landscape, as I trudged through the freezing snow by myself from one screening to the next. You do a lot of trudging at Sundance because it sometimes seems like it's just going to be quicker, less frustrating, less freezing, to hoof it from one venue to the next, instead of waiting for the bus to show up. You also spend a lot of time alone. Even though you may be in a crowded room full of your peers, you are also in your head, in the dark, comforted only by the crazy thoughts in your brain. It can get to you. It doesn't help that you barely eat anything, and you barely sleep at all. My condo was way the hell out of town, so once I left in the morning, I never came back. I was also usually too late and too hungover in the mornings to eat any breakfast. Besides, there was no food in my house. To get to our place, you had to take a bus and then trudge half a mile to the condo complex. I wasn't going to hump a load of groceries out there. When I was hungry, I would usually just grab a handful of sweaty orange cheese blobs at the Filmmakers Lodge and stuff them in my face as I hurried along to my next film. After my last screening of the day, I'd maybe get lucky and run into someone I knew and tag along with them to a party. John Brody brought me up to the CAA party one night. Back then, it was held on the third floor of Grappa, a cozy Italian spot at the top of Maine. It wasn't like the later years where the agencies would execute large-scale activations, turning some warehouse into a nightclub, and you'd need a retinal scan of your anus to get in the door. In fact, at the CAA party, Scott Greenberg, Taylor Sheridan's agent, was the only security manning the door. He knew John, and much to my delight, recognized me, and we were let in. Other nights when I didn't run into anyone I knew, I'd take the shuttle to one of the official parties. The festival had an official party every night back then, and you got a pass to all of them with your badge. Longing for human connection, I'd wander the periphery of the crowd, pounding cocktails until I was near enough to oblivion. It was time to stumble home. After a couple days of this, you're half out of your mind, and it becomes difficult to tell if the film that's just unspooled before your eyes is even any good at all. If you find this hard to believe, just ask the distribution execs who bought Hamlet 2, or Meet Earl and the Dying Girl, or the big sale from my first Sundance, the Spitfire Grill. They were all box office disasters that sold out of Park City for 8 figures. For me, the failure of my critical eye precipitated a crisis of networking. When the credits rolled and the lights came on and the filmmakers gathered for the Q&A, I often found myself frozen. Do I stick around to try to jam my business card into the filmmaker's paw? I mean, it was mortifying under any circumstances to try to shoulder my way through the crush of well-wishers, to introduce myself to some filmmaker I didn't know. Hi, Nick Morton, Phoenix Pictures. I loved your film. It seemed absurd, a parody of the Hollywood upstart. We should get together when you're back in LA. You also have so little time at the end of the screening because the Sundance staff is hurriedly trying to clear the room. If the film is any good, there's a lot of people trying to get some FaceTime with the filmmaker. But even when everyone seems to think the film is good, Sundance is prone to a kind of mass hysteria that feels ludicrous once you're back in LA. I was worried Mike and Christy might think I was insane if I forced them to meet with a filmmaker like Scott Silver, whose film Johns explored male prostitution on the Sunset Strip. Would Phoenix ever make a movie like that? I doubted it. But here's the thing. Scott Silver would go on to write 8 Mile and The Joker, Careers can be long and circuitous. Artists create new work. They learn and grow. It's hard to tell and hard to predict who will be able to nurse their Sundance debut into a full-blown career. I loved Saul Rubinek's directorial debut, Jerry and Tom, but whatever happened to that guy? Peter Cattanio's debut, The Full Monty, premiered at Sundance with universal acclaim, but who remembers his next film? Mark Schwann's directorial debut, 35 Miles from Normal, was, in my opinion, totally unremarkable. And yet I went on to make Schwann's first studio movie, Whatever It Takes, starring James Franco no less. Schwann also had a full-blown television hit in One Tree Hill only a few years later. Neither Schwann's nor Rubinek's films debuted at my first Sundance, but I introduced myself to both of them at screenings in subsequent years and offered my card. Rubinek looked at me like I was insane, and he didn't have time for children like me. Schwann, on the other hand, was gracious. Citizen Ruth, Alexander Payne's film, premiered at my first Sundance, and I found it hilarious and insightful. But I remember my colleagues at Phoenix sharing none of my excitement. Years later, I sat next to Payne at a wedding, and he was nothing short of charming. I'm not saying these brief interactions could possibly presage a career. I'm saying you never know. It takes a monumental act of will to breathe life into an independent film. Anyone who's done it is probably worth meeting. I should have pressed my card into the palm of every filmmaker who made it there, but I didn't. Sometimes I had to rush off to my next screening and told myself I didn't have time. Other times I told myself I didn't like the film, even if I did, and scurried out of the theater, prepared to tell the folks back home it was just lost on me. One time, during a screening of Mark Pellington's Going All the Way, that marked the debut of both Ben Affleck and Rachel Weisz, John Brody told me to keep an eye on that Affleck guy, I was so hungover and strung out I nearly fainted during the botched suicide scene. In fact, to prevent a total loss of consciousness, I had to slide out of my chair and lie down on the floor across the feet of the poor filmmakers in my row. I then slithered over to their booths to the aisle, where I crawled out of the prospector on my hands and knees before collapsing on the nasty but reassuringly cool tiles of the men's room floor. I didn't get a chance to tell Pellington how much I loved his film until many years later, but boy was he gracious. As you can see, I did a lot of drinking at Sundance. The party scene was legendary. Still, I found over the years that parties were almost without exception a complete waste of time. A sweaty crush of bad breath and douchebaggery jammed into an overcapacity venue with no food and an absurd line for drinks. Still, there was often serendipity in the process of getting to a party, or leaving one. After the premiere of The Full Monty, Michael Costigan, producer of Brokeback Mountain, offered me a ride in his overstuffed hatchback. I had to jam myself in the back with another dude, and as we folded ourselves into the tiny space, taking care not to knee each other in the balls, he held out his hand to introduce himself. "Hi, Toby," he said. It was Tobey Maguire. At one party many years later, I found myself feeling old and out of sorts, and slowly got jammed into a weird dead corner on my way to the exit. The only other old guy in the whole party was jammed in there too. We shared a long-suffering grin and introduced ourselves. It turned out he was Phil Mossman, the lead guitarist of LCD Sound System, and we stayed friends for years to come. At my first Sundance, I prowled Main Street every night after my screenings, scouring the lines of people waiting to get into the various lounges, in hopes of spotting a familiar face who might kiss me inside. Most of the time, I'd just run into other junior execs, like me, who couldn't get in anywhere, and we would abandon the mission altogether, in favor of getting drunk in one of the Main Street bars. On one of these nights, I ran into Mark Varadian, producer of the Transformers, who was an executive at Disney back then, and pretty dialed in. Still, I think we had to climb a chain-link fence to sneak into the Warner's party before Main Street finally cleared out, and I somehow caught the last bus out of town to my condo in the sticks. By then, the snow was coming down in soft and steady waves, and I trudged the last half mile from the bus stop home in my New Balance shoes, getting damper and damper by the second. I didn't really mind. I'd made some friends and had some adventures, and all the booze I drank made me feel less lonely. But when I stumbled up the front steps to the plate glass window of my condo and reached into my pocket to unlock the front door, I discovered, to my total horror, that in my drunken shenanigans I'd lost my key. Fuck, this was not good. My shoes were wet, I had no gloves, it was snowing hard, and I was very drunk. But I was not so drunk I couldn't recognize the acute danger of my situation. If I didn't find shelter out here in an escalating blizzard, I would likely die. I figured there must be a way to get in, and crunched around the outside of the condo in the snow, looking for an open window, or something, or anything. But the condo was sealed up tight. Christy had already returned to L.A., so there was no one inside to wake up and let me in. I couldn't rouse the neighbors either because there was no way they'd have a key. There was no one around to call because nobody had cell phones. I couldn't walk back into town because the buses had stopped, and it was too far to go the whole way on foot. Even if I got into town, everything would be closed. Fuck. Panic welled inside me as I circled the condo complex seeking shelter. Anywhere. There was not even an alcove I could hunker down in, pull my wool coat tight around my body, and pray for the best. There were probably 4 buildings in the whole complex, modest structures spread out around a central parking lot, and I scoured the other buildings for shelter but had no luck. Then I noticed a 5th structure, It wasn't actually a building, but an 8-foot fence that circled what looked like a swimming pool and cabana. I scaled the fence and hurled myself into the snow-covered deck below. The little clubhouse had sliding glass doors that opened into a small lounge, but the doors were locked. Still, I thought, maybe there's a restroom here, and I stomped around the building until I found a door that was blessedly not secured. It wasn't a restroom, it was a sauna. I heaved the door open, pushing against the deepening snow, and wedged myself inside. I cranked up the sauna's timer, blasting the cedar room, hissing and popping to life, and fell quickly to sleep. I woke from time to time during the night when the timer ran out, and the little space would cool back down to freezing again. My teeth would start chattering, my whole body shaking violently as my head thumped against the sauna's wood bench, and blessedly woke me up before I could freeze to death. Thank God. I then leaped to the timer, my limbs stiff and numb, and crank it back to life. I was hesitant to crank it to the max, lest I fall asleep and somehow die from heat stroke. Then I would slowly warm my way back to sleep. Eventually I could see the gray dawn light peeking through the diamond of glass in the sauna's one small pane, and I knew I'd survive. But what to do now? I figured, like any Sundance psychopath, I'd set out for my next screening. I reached for my bag to check my schedule, but oh, fuck. In all the craziness, I'd somehow lost my screening tickets as well. Now, if you've never been a full-fledged, out-of-control, world-class fuck-up, a teenage alcoholic who drank a hole in their stomach, got arrested at 12 stealing their parents' car, and suffered a psychotic break at 17 on a megadose of psilocybin after sneaking out of your New Hampshire boarding school and absconding across the country to Los Angeles to watch 3 nights of the Grateful Dead in the violence-torn wasteland of Inglewood in the 80s. This might seem like a pretty low bottom, a dire wake-up call, a scary reckoning that might make you take some radical steps to right the course of your life and get things back on track. I felt that for sure. Part of me wanted to just break under the pressure of the circumstances I'd crafted myself. I wanted to call Mike Medavoy weeping and tell him I'd fucked up, that it was all too much for me. I didn't understand any of this and I wasn't cracked up for it, but I had been this low before, in holes deeper than this one, and I'd managed somehow to claw my way back to the surface. I had learned that if I just buckled down and turned my energy towards fixing this thing, one difficult step at a time, I might just salvage it. At least I might hide my mess enough that I wouldn't get in trouble. The snow had stopped anyway, and my shoes were dry. First, I figured out how to get another key to my condo. There was some kind of central office and it opened early, and I was soon able to get back inside and get myself a shower and a change of clothes. I then screwed up my courage and my charm and sought out the kind, sweet, and generous Nicole Guillemet in her bunker under the city lift and begged her to issue me a new set of tickets to replace the ones I drunkenly lost. She must have sensed my desperation. Or maybe she suffers some kind of savior complex. Whatever the case, I cannot imagine this happening in modern Sundance. She showed me unreasonable mercy and replaced my badge and everything I'd lost. I was so grateful, I nearly wept. I almost felt human again. I trudged down to the Prospector to catch a screening for one of the tickets I'd been issued. I didn't know anything about the film except it starred Gina Gershon, whose name I recognized from The Player, a film I'd seen the summer before I set out for Hollywood, whose accuracy every day continued to astound me. I settled into my seat with no small amount of relief. There was at least a certain familiarity in the act of watching a film. Here was something I knew I could do. In the seat next to me sat a strikingly glamorous woman. She was decked out in matching snow clothes and a sophisticated fur cap, a sculptural disc of beaver pelt levitating over her brow like Julie Christie in Dr. Zhivago. When she turned my way and we made eye contact, she practically glowed. "Wow," I clacked instinctively. "What a cool hat." She smiled gently and offered me her hand. "Hi, I'm Marina Zenovic," she said. "What's your name?" "Nick Morton," I answered. "From Phoenix Pictures." Networking had never seemed so good, so natural, so pure. "Nick Morton," she repeated, listening to the words like some mysterious and distant tune. "What a cool name." Marina remains a good friend to this day. We really only ever see each other at Sundance, even these 30 years later that we both live in Los Angeles and have kids at the same school. But we keep in touch through email and social media. My second year at Sundance, I believe she made a documentary about independent film in which I think I appear briefly with my old partner in crime from WMA, Gregory McKnight. Marina went on to become a world-class documentarian, winning an Emmy for her film about Roman Polanski wanted and desired. But back then, she was just another comer, like me. The incident taught me to always introduce yourself to the person beside you, wherever you are. You never know where you might make a friend or a valuable connection. The Gina Gershon movie was dark and funny. I don't remember it well, except that it had a rich, earthy palette, was immaculately constructed, and had glorious shots of thick pools of paint seeping across the screen. The crowd went wild. Marina and I were both delighted and sat around for the Q&A. Afterward, I rushed to the room's proscenium to try to corner the pair of filmmakers and press my card into their palms. It seemed unlikely the gambit would go anywhere, Sure, the film was good, but the director seemed an unlikely duo to make any kind of headway in Hollywood. They were classic outsiders, two burly men in work pants and red suspenders, more like lumberjacks than directors. If I had to guess, I would predict careers more akin to Saul Rubinek than Alexander Payne. Still, one of them took my card, but I doubted I would ever hear from them again. And I was right. I never did hear from them again. But it wasn't because they returned to the sticks of Manitoba to collect maple syrup. They got too busy making The Matrix. Those men were the Wachowski brothers, and that movie was their directorial debut, Bound. I guess at least I had an okay eye. The next day was the last day of the festival, and every year on that last day, Sundance shows all the festival winners after they are announced in an awards ceremony the night before. Park City is all but deserted by then. Most Hollywood players, in fact, leave after the first weekend. If you're a movie lover, I came to learn over the years, the second half of the festival is really where it's at. The douchebags have pretty much left, and what remains are filmmakers and film fanatics with lively conversations between DPs and writers erupting in the deserted lobby of the Eccles Theater. It feels like a celebration of film. Indeed, a festival. I woke up at the crack of dawn that day and trudged down to the film office to wait for it to open up. By now, the bunker-like space felt like a home away from home to me, and I knew by heart how to navigate the maze of black curtains and plastic stanchions that led to the desk that would service my needs. I had 4 blank ticket coupons left in my package, and I turned them in for screenings of the festival winners: Best Director, Best Documentary, Audience Award winner, and the winner of the Waldo Salt Screenwriting Prize. Storm clouds were gathering around the mountaintops, and it looked like we were in for another serious blizzard. I didn't care. I had nothing to gain seeing these films. All the titles had been acquired, and the filmmakers were unlikely to show up at these last unscheduled events. There were no elbows to twist or backs to pat. I was going because I was excited for some warm popcorn, and to lose myself in the cozy dark like any other civilian, nursing the wounds of modern life on the succor of celluloid and its projection of our shared humanity. I was going for something new to me, something nurtured over that first death march through Park City and the many, many Sundances to come. I was going for my newfound love of film.